So to people on YouTube, I'm used to being on Twitter, but to people on YouTube, George Pell was sentenced today, and I thought we could pass the time waiting for Manafort to be sentenced by talking a little bit about what Pell was charged with. So George Pell, Australia's highest ranking Catholic, also was ranked at one point number 3 in the worldwide hierarchy of Catholic officials. He was treasurer to the Vatican under the Pope. He was Archbishop at one point of a diocese in Melbourne, of a church called St. Patrick's Cathedral, at which cathedral he sexually assaulted 2 13-year-old boys. Here is a breakdown of the sentences for each charge. So charge 1, indecent act against victim R, 2 years and 6 months. Charge 2, sexual penetration against victim J, 4 years. Charge 3, indecent act against victim J where Pell touched victim's genitals, 2 years and 6 months. Charge 4, indecent act against victim J where Pell touched his own genitals in the victim's presence, 15 months. And charge 5, indecent act against victim J during the second episode, 2 months later, 18 months. A total of 6 years in prison with a non-parole period of 3 years. A survivor, who goes by the pseudonym of Michael Advocate, watched the sentence being handed down on a TV monitor outside court. He said that the jail term was far too light for the suffering inflicted on his victims. Give some thought to the poor victims that will go through life in the most damaged and traumatic way. It's like trying to get through life with a broken leg that never fixes, he said. You've got 2 innocent young boys that have had their lives totally destroyed. They've both received lifetime sentences. And it is true that one of the victims died from a heroin overdose some years before. But his friend spoke up for him, reported the abuse, and testified for 2 days in church. Sorry, in court, not church at all. From the father of that victim who died from a heroin overdose, as many victims of horrific sexual abuse do die, not all, but some. On the jury's decision and George Pell's conviction, he said he was convicted by 12 men and women. If our judicial system doesn't work in this country, what the hell have we got? What is it that we have? It's got to work. The conviction has got to be upheld because I think it's just. And on knowing Pell will spend years in prison, he said, yeah, that's a good feeling. I watched him walking out of that court and I thought to myself, well, I'm going to sleep in my bed tonight. Where are you sleeping? I get to go out tomorrow. My son doesn't. But still, what do we do? On what his son was like before he was abused. My son was one of those kids, a typical boy, gets into mischief. He was honest, he liked helping his grandparents. He'd always disappear and I'd ring up my mum. Oh yeah, he's been here for the past 2 hours helping me cook, she'd say. Things like that. These 2 13-year-old boys had snuck into the sacristy after a church service and were swigging from a bottle of sacramental wine when George Pell found them and forced himself on them. The father also says, I commend the young fellow who has come forward. I knew him very well when he was a kid. He lived at my place for a while. He was a good friend of my son's. He's always been an upstanding fellow. I'm not surprised that he came forward. I'm not surprised that he did what he did. He kept it in for a long time and that would have been hell for him, absolute hell. But I'm really appreciative and thankful that he did what he did. That he did come forward. I want to give him a hug. He was a fabulous little kid. He's a fabulous man now. Director of the Centre for Religious Studies at Monash University, Professor Constant Muse, said the Catholic Church must now put aside its support for George Pell and instead focus on renewing its leadership and supporting those who have suffered abuse. Locally within the church, this sentence will have a divisive effect. I'm sure between people that support him and the feeling that the church needs to move on. He's lodging an application and Pell he's lodged an appeal and he'll be lodging a bail application in the lead up to the appeal. So Pell is hoping that he will be able to walk free from jail sooner rather than later. All right, well, I want to say more, read more from the other victim of George Pell that was validated by the jury's guilty finding, but I'll leave that for later. In the meantime, I'm just going to, actually no, I'm going to go talk on Twitter instead because people might watch that. But I hope people really do listen and engage with the fact that the jury convicted George Pell and that the judge who made his sentence be broadcast live, or who allowed for it to be broadcast live, take on the weight of what happened, what our justice system produced, whilst it still stands, and that we accept justice for these children as a good outcome. They were children then, they are not children anymore. They're not alive one of them is not alive anymore, but the other is still wrestling with the consequences of such a gross betrayal of trust as a young boy. There are many others in the region in which he lived. From Ballarat to Melbourne, there was an organised ring of pedophile priests who preyed upon children and who supported each other in those actions. Pell had already appeared walking a fellow priest to court, Gavin Risdale, who was found to have abused a horrific number of boys. And George Pell said he regretted showing support for Gavin Risdale, but they had been roommates at one point. I mean, now we just know that type of behaviour was contagious, not in the sense of any bacterial contamination, but in the ability to rationalise and indulge in abuse of children for the purpose of your own sexual gratification, your own ability to exercise power and the thrill, presumably, of getting away with it, even when it was being done close by to other people. So gross, so disgusting. All right, that's all. Thanks for listening, and